Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And here's a big one, really big one. We're going to be talking about the newest album from Migos called Culture 2. And to think I was starting to come around on these guys. Okay, you know what? That's unfair. As I've said before, 2017 was the first year I started seeing any appeal in this trio of rappers. Most because their flows and punchlines had evolved a little bit to match with production that was steadily becoming more interesting. Migos, they weren't making complicated music, but there is a place for that sort of sound and vibe in hip-hop and pop culture, and providing the hooks and the delivery were sharp with a couple good lines, I was willing to praise them for what they were trying to do. And while I was lukewarm and negative on Motorsport, and I've only cooled on it since, I really like Stir Fry as a single, most because it highlighted where the trio could go and take their sound going forward. There was some potential there. And then it seemed in rapid succession that Migos started fumbling the ball. Offset dropped a verse that many have read as homophobic for no discernible reason. Not the first time with these guys either. But what looked a little worrisome was that there was little information released about their upcoming project Culture 2 before it came out. Hell, up until the night before, we didn't even have a track list. And then the album was released, and the backlash began in earnest. Not for the content, where it should be, but for the album's length. 24 tracks, 106 minutes, over an hour and a half of Migos. Even diehard fans are kind of wary about this much from the group, because even in the era of No Limit, or the bloated mid-2000s where hour-long projects from mainstream rappers became the norm, this was excess. And I'll admit right out of the gate, this was going to be an uphill battle for me. I don't typically care for Migos as it is, and I didn't cover the first Culture because most of it wound up on Billboard Breakdown anyway. But this could be the breaking point for the modern short attention span listener, especially as this wasn't a concept album and probably couldn't earn its length. Hell, at least when Big Crit released Forever is a mighty long time, it could be easily split in two, and he was exploring a variety of themes and sounds, which Migos, I don't even think that's in their playbook. But hey, you know what? I could be wrong. People are gravitating to this on Spotify for some reason. So what did we get on Culture 2? Well, I got exactly what I expected. It's not like Migos switched things up or anything. If anything, it feels like the principle behind Culture 2 was just excess. More songs, more auto-tune, more guest verses, more time as a whole. And if there is a record that puts Migos' limitations in even sharper view, it's that extra time. The larger question, in a matter of speaking, is who this album is even for, because even diehard Migos fans will balk at a record this long and with this many interchangeable tracks. And for the mainstream public, look, there is such a thing as flooding the market, even if they're going to songs with their favorite guest stars. And it's not like trap wasn't saturated enough already in the mainstream. And I want to establish the length. It isn't really the issue here. I've reviewed hip-hop albums as long as this, if not longer. But they all have a lot more to say, which takes us to the first big issue, the content. I get that Migos have always had a limited scope in their topics. Shooting people, screwing your girl, dealing and doing drugs, some passing mentions of the come-up without a lot of detail, a bunch of luxury porn. You've heard this all before, and you can do these songs well. But that's the thing, not only have you heard it all before, it's not like Migos is opting to tell a story or craft a larger narrative or saying anything about the narrow topics they've chosen. Hell, most often we're lucky if we get a consistent idea within the same song. And that was an issue for Migos on the first Culture, but here it's exacerbated by the length of a lot of these tracks. At some point, if you don't modulate the excess, not only will it feel repetitive, but it feels redundant, not helped by flows and verses that just run together. You can take a grab bag of verses on this album, swap them around, and most people will never know the difference. I'll give each member some credit for diversifying their flows a little bit. Quavo's more melodic, Takeoff's more gruff, Offset's more technically skilled, but it's not like they play off each other within a verse or play different characters or offer something unique to each person alone. And when you drizzle even more auto-tune on them, they sound less and less distinct as people. And hunting for moments of distinctness is what really got me through this listening experience. It was a chore. The guest verses, maybe a punchline or two, a hook, or a bit of production that stood out for me, as well as any bad line that jumps off the page, and there were a lot of them. We're getting to them. But you end up gravitating to fragments instead of standout songs because so much of it just blurs together. Not a lot of it really rises above. And what's genuinely exasperating is that whenever Migos start to hit a stride in a song, it just goes off the rails with a bad line or a bit of production or something that just doesn't connect for me. Take Stir Fry. I love the brittle synth work and the more complex percussion courtesy of Pharrell and a really great hook. But then Offset compares the jewels in his chain to boogers and just pushes me me out of the whole vibe, and then Takeoff's verse wasn't that good either. But what's jarring is that the opposite is often true. You get songs that are not good at all with obvious flaws, but they're saved from being outright atrocious by a few isolated elements. And no song captures that more than Motorsport, where despite a lousy hook, ugly production, Migos themselves not really impressing me, and Nicki Minaj hurting a strong verse with repeated rhymes and that potty line at the end of her verse, but she's still mostly good, and Cardi B is legitimately great for what this song is. Most because you can tell that Cardi B's actually happy to be here and she's trying. Something I seriously doubt has even crossed the mind of our intrepid trio of Migos. And I reference both those two singles because, and let's be honest, the vast majority of you, you're never gonna dig in deep into this obese behemoth of a record outside of snippets or maybe more singles. And those two songs, they really are representative of both sides and issues with this album. But are there other moments worth mentioning or calling out? Honestly, not really. Even on songs like the opener with the more opulent string section in the production, or Narcos with the buried Latin guitar, or the bassy desaturated production of Moving Too Fast, or Beast, or Top Down and Enough, they could be interesting if the melody was accentuated or pushed to the forefront of the mix. Or even on Bad Bitches Only, you get a pretty sweet sample from Kanye West only to bury it behind a hook from 21 Savage. Similar case for Drake utterly phoning it in on Walk It Talk It, or Gucci Mane failing to keep up on CC, or Ty Dolla $ign, Travis Scott, and Big Sean all humiliating themselves in the ugly atonal track White Sand. And that's not even getting to Post Malone wasting everybody's time on Notice Me. Maybe the ugliest and clunkiest track focused on taking girls that good flows from the Migos can't even save. It almost seems like they're actively smothering the elements that could make the song interesting or distinct for either good or bad. But you know what? There are a few that kind of stand out, a couple elements. Going back to Narcos, for the sort of hyper-violent song that it actually is, it makes sense that Takeoff is going to dismember people with a chainsaw. That's kind of distinct. And while the flows are painfully basic on Open It Up, the more opulent production with the horns does help it. Now, if we're going for purely ridiculous lines, we've got Offset on Superstar talking about his hoe is addicted to faucets, or how on Emoji a Chain you get that line on the hook, and Offset shows his continued gaudy taste by comparing his diamonds to McFlurries, and it's not like Metro Boomin's beat is good enough to redeem that, I'm sorry. And on that qualifying note, we've got Too Much Jewelry, where Takeoff talks about being like a walking chicken because he's got too many diamonds. Even if I do think he kind of snapped on his verse and Zaytoven's flute sounded pretty damn good, that doesn't redeem the rest of the song. And then there's Gang Gang, which is all auto-tuned, oddly sentimental crooning, repeating the word gang into incoherence when Takeoff's not talking about putting his girl into a chokehold. But not to compete with Offset on Crown the King, where he talks about drowning your bitch with his watch. As Quavo says that he catches a Babe Ruth the Bat, I batted the bat, and Takeoff references Soulja Boy. Because of course he does. And Flooded is just about as bad, with an awful hook from Offset that mentions pulling up like Huggies, and Takeoff wanting to be called McLovin from Superbad. And then there's 2 Playa, which actually had some potential with 2 Chainz in his natural element, with that saxophone that sounded pretty good. Until we get Quavo talking about some girl's perky breasts before Offset calls your girl a throwaway mutt. Then of course he's still screwing. And thus, it gets a little bit hard for me to then hear Quavo on the final track solemnly croon about the culture, because what value is this culture on this album really bringing to the table? Ask yourselves that question. But here's the thing. While I put together many a review for albums that I don't like or don't care about, this might be one of my first reviews that feels actively pointless. Because this review will not change the mind of any diehard Migos fan at this point, and casual fans will be put off by the length and just wait for the questionably good singles, or they'll check it out piecemeal on Spotify. Now, Migos themselves, they'll still move enough units and sell out enough shows to finance all the gaudy jewelry, lean, and guns they want, until of course the bubble pops and they're forced to evolve or fade away. Now, they might have some chance to survive that. Quavo showed some good production instincts on this project, I'll give him that, even if the verses didn't always come together and the auto-tune sounded atrocious. And both Offset and Takeoff, they're passable MCs. A lot of whack lines, but they're still passable. But if we look back on the No Limit era, we know it's much more likely they won't last. Unaware that this record was probably one of those shots that ultimately brought them down. And then all the rest of the critics and the music press will engage in the sort of historical revisionism that they never really liked these guys in comparison with the newest flavor the week, and I'll be sitting back here with an exasperated expression as trends in hip-hop move on and we get some new inanity. Because with Culture 2, I got exactly what I was expecting. And if you're a fan watching me, you probably got exactly what you were expecting from me. And if all I did here was confirm your expectations, unable to provide any sort of usable analysis or distinctive highlights because Culture 2 is empty of both, what's the fucking point? Ultimately, I was considering not even giving this a score, but you know what? For as nihilistic and self-defeating as this experience was for me, both in listening to this 106-minute album and writing this review, I'm sorry, I can't succumb to that. Being made to feel small by a record that in all of its bloat reveals a rattling emptiness of trap snares, triplet flows, diamonds, drugs, and fucking your girl. In other words, light 4 out of 10, not recommended, and when music historians come across this album, and maybe even this review in the decades to come to analyze the trend of trap, look, don't waste your time remembering this. Do something else. Anything else. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Guys, look, with Migos, they do what they do. I wasn't expecting anything more than that, and it's just mediocre and a chore to get through this record. And you know what? For a certain environment, I get why they make this sort of sound, but there was too much of it, so much of it ran together. The bars just pile up in a way that wasn't witty or interesting. I can't justify this album, not in the shape that it is, not with the bloat that it is. And with that, if you want to buy it, actually, I'm going to put the link in the description below. I highly recommend you don't click it. There are better things to do with your money. Oh yeah, if all you diehard Migos fans, there's the poll. You can tell me how wrong I am. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in supporting this channel and impacting my schedule so that I don't have to review this, a link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. It's pretty full right now. There's a lot of stuff on that schedule, and if you want to check that, link to my Instagram where I'm posting it every time it gets updated. But until next time, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.